think Jaden Daniels. I said I thought he was going to be really good, but
And he's
Caleb's
really
grown
good.
on me for
He's super
sure.
talented. I mean, I
Yeah.
voted for him for offensive rookie of the year, but just going back to what we said before, like Kliff Kingsbury tailored a very unfuck upable offense for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'd have been
One read and
hard.
go. You got one read and go. Hey, if that guy's not open, take off.
One read, yeah. It's a single read offense, single side of the field. So even a team, even when defenses are playing zone coverage, you only got one flat or one cloud to read and a safety up top. It's like awesome. Like I'm not knocking it. Washington made the right decision.
Right.
Remember Shane, let's not forget that Kliff Kingsbury interviewed for the Bears offensive coordinator position, and they sat down in a room with Shane Waldron, and Shane Waldron pitched them this intricate, advanced offense, and they thought to themselves, yeah, that's the best idea for our rookie quarterback.
Yeah, and I think the Bears just didn't want a gimmick offense, right? I think they're just like, oh man, we're so thirsty for a pro style offense. We're so thirsty for this complicated offense.
They'll get, but your offense doesn't have to be the Da Vinci Code to be pro style. Like you don't, they can have an efficient vertical attack. Like, I mean, fucking Baltimore did it with Todd Monken. I mean, it's that's not a gimmick offense.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Drew Petzing in Arizona, that's not a gimmick offense. It's all over. You don't need a gimmick. You can have an offense that's not overly complicated and still be considered a pro style, modern offense, a field stretching offense. But that's the problem is the Bears don't even know what the fuck that looks like. Their ownership has no idea what that even looks like. Like they can sit there and say all day, I want, but they don't know how to identify it. That's why they keep hiring the wrong people.
So speaking of head office, McCaskey's, Poles, Kevin Warren, you made a good point earlier that Ryan Poles has had no choices in head coaches since his tenure. The McCaskeys think they know football and they don't.
Did choose Matt Eberflus, but out of a condensed.
But out of so that's not the same in my opinion. If you're given, here's
he chose to keep Eberflus, right? Because Eberflus was there before him, right? He chose to keep him.
He did.
Yeah. Okay.
No. He hired Eberflus in his first crack because they did the GM head coach thing at the same time, but he only got to pick him out of a hand selected group of candidates.
Right. Okay. And last season it was,
and then he kept him last season.
It was, but there was insider sources, which could be true, could be not, but saying that he didn't want to keep him, but the McCaskeys overrode that decision. So
maybe
I don't think that's true.
And speaking. I mean, I don't know. I don't put it past them, but
I think Ryan Poles genuinely did believe that with better circumstances, Matt Eberflus could be successful and he respected him highly as a leader, and he respected him highly. Look, what saved Matt Eberflus's job last year with Ryan Poles is the beginning of last season when they started 0-4 and they found every way to lose a game, and it was embarrassing, and their defensive coordinator got bounced out, and there was all that shit about, the FBI raids and all that. It's all, we're not even going to get into all that shit, but it was a disaster. It was a shitstorm at Hallis Hall. Players were quitting. You had the Chase Claypool thing. The way that Matt Eberflus was able to weather that storm is what gave him one more year in Chicago. And that was, to the best of my knowledge, Ryan Poles' decision. He was genuinely impressed by the way that he navigated that storm last year at the beginning of the season and got the defense to play as a top 5 unit down the stretch and maximized what he could possibly get out of Justin Fields. So he thought that with Caleb Williams there and, Romo Dunes and Keenan Allen and DJ Moore in his second year and a good offensive coordinator, that he would be able to get the job done. Ultimately, that all turned out to be a fallacy, and we all know what happened. But I firmly believe that Ryan Poles genuinely believed Matt Eberflus was the right decision last year.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, no. I was just going to say I agree, because I think that was the word coming out last year was, hey, we got Montez Sweat. Once we got Sweat and that defense looked amazing. Hey, let's not screw up the defense. Eberflus knows defense. Let's go get an offensive guy in here, give him all the weapons. And it looked like on paper it was going to be amazing. They picked the wrong offensive guy, and then it ultimately exposed Eberflus in his coaching. He's bad situational coaching,
100%.
And destroyed player
Tyreek Stevenson
attitude.
Yeah, I mean, you're Kelly. That was 100% correct. You nailed it. You hit it on the head. And it was after that Washington game. So Matt Eberflus's fatal error was not wearing the Washington loss.
Yeah.
When he didn't wear that, he lost everybody in that locker room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's not speculation. That's a fact. I know that from the building.
Yeah. No doubt. I mean, look at it. What was it? 10 straight losses.
How could you respect him if you don't do that? That was, I mean,
that was the first
crazy.
sign of adversity for that team. They were 4-2 entering that game. It was the first sign of adversity for the team. And you had a second-year cornerback who made a stupid ass mistake in Tyreek Stevenson, and everybody felt like Matt Eberflus threw the kid under the bus and threw the whole unit under the bus because he knew that he was a lame duck candidate if shit went south.
Yeah.
And that was it for him. There was no win in that locker room back.
Yeah. And how embarrassing was it for him when he got fired? He went and did the presser in the morning and was like, "Hey, that made the whole organization look terrible."
Man, I mean, that's just that's just some bozo shit, man. They run a mom and pop operation in a bazillion-dollar industry. Like, to me, that's an inexcusable mistake from an ownership group, and it also looks fucking awful when you're trying to court a legitimate top-tier head coaching candidate. Like,
and let's not forget to mention too, like, in hindsight, everybody, or at the time, everybody was like, "Hey, the Bears never released a coach in the middle of the season. Maybe they should. This is the year to do it." But then in hindsight, you look at it and it's like, well, okay, you bring in Thomas Brown at offensive coordinator. It looks like he's sort of picking up, a little bit and on the offense. And then you get rid of Eberflus, right? Then you bring Thomas Brown head coach. So you take him away from the offense. And then not only does the offense suffer, but now you don't have Eberflus, the defense starts suffering. Right. I mean, in hindsight, it's almost like, oh, damn, you might as well have kept Eberflus. Maybe we would have squeezed more.
I guess now, like in hindsight, we could look at the way that those final 5 games played out and say, oh, what did it matter anyway, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But like to your point,
I think it mattered to the players.
But at the end of the day, he had to go. Like, and Thomas Brown, hopefully he lands on his feet somewhere else as an offensive coordinator. But it was too far gone. I don't, none of that shit is Thomas Brown's fault down the final. Final five.
Yeah, you're right.
The product was too damaged.
Yeah.
Drew, you got any thoughts on that?
On what part?
On if Thomas, on the coaches, if Eberflus should have been fired mid-season or stayed on.
I mean, I feel like it didn't make too much difference. I knew it wasn't gonna change much with the team. I'm kind of torn because it's like I knew he should have been fired, but like, what did it do for us this season? Like, did it hurt Caleb Williams? I liked what I saw from Thomas Brown. He seemed like a decent leader. It seemed like he had the respect of the locker room from what I saw. I didn't hate the play calling. He seems like somewhat of a talented guy. I don't know if it would be possible, probably not, keeping him around as some sort of assistant just because he does have that rapport with Caleb. But, I do think them firing Eberflus was probably the right decision. I just don't know. Like, well, if we kept Eberflus, like, I don't think it changes anything.
Mm-mm.
I knew they were going to be bad still. I didn't think it was going to be like a total flip. But yeah,
go ahead.
You're right. But there's one small part of me that believes that if they would have kept Eberflus, the optics in the eyes of a potential head coach hire like Ben Johnson or somebody would have been awful, because that would have reflected upon the front office and ownership and their appetite for subpar and losing. Not cutting it right there and saying that Thanksgiving Day meltdown was so atrocious, so negligent, so embarrassing that this shit can't go on for another day. Like, if they wouldn't have done that, if I'm Ben Johnson, who was on the other sideline in that game, watching Matt Eberflus do that, and they keep his ass, I don't want this job.
So you think Ben Johnson's number one priority?
Well, we'll get into that.
Their number one priority is, or what my number one candidate is.
Hold on, we're gonna get into that. I got a couple more things that have been flowing around the news cycle. Speaking of insider statements, and one thing that was said was that Kevin Warren blocked out the Jim Harbaugh option before the season started due to him not liking his experience with Jim in the NCAA. What do you think about that statement, Patrick?
Kevin Warren Kevin Warren's a used car salesman who's here to build a stadium. He was the fall guy for the Jim Harbaugh thing. In actuality, the McCaskies were never going to be comfortable with a fierce personality like Jim Harbaugh being their head coach and running personnel, because that's what he does with the Chargers, and that was going to be the bare minimum expectation anywhere he went, that he was going to have personnel say, and he was going to be the head coach. And he's vocal, and he's loud, and he's brash, and he's blunt. And the McCaskies were never going to be okay with that, which is why I thought the whole Mike Vrabel thing this hiring cycle was stupid, because they're never going to be okay with something like that. This is
wrong with the McCaskies. They have, like, they don't want to give up control.
It's easy to draw the correlation between Warren and Harbaugh from their Big 10 days, but I think that's because it's so easy. He's an easy fall guy, and he's never going to come out and say, no, that's not true, because he likes his cushy ass job. But the McCaskies were never going to allow a personality as fierce as Jim Harbaugh into their building. It just disrupts too much of what they got going on and what they
he's comfortable with that. Yeah, Jim Harbaugh ends up being bigger than the actual team at some point. So is it official? Is Vrabel on the Patriots?
Yeah, they announced it today. That's
so
that's a done deal, and no
speaking of
there.
Cushy seats, what are the odds on Poles having his final opportunity this season, or even making it to the upcoming season?
So he will be the GM this year. There's no doubt about that, and he's going to hire this head coach. Beyond that, his hire is going to tell his future.
Yeah.
We agree with it or not, and I don't know that I necessarily do agree with it, that he gets another bite at the apple per se, although really this is his first bite at the apple, because they gave him a selection of guys that he could choose from the first time he hired a head coach. But he's going to hire this head coach, and whatever happens from there is going to seal his fate one way.
Do you think they're going to run the same strategy? They're going to give him a selection, or are they going to give him more free reign over this?
This is going to be his head coach. There's no external search committee here. The only people other than Ryan Pace and Kevin Warren and ownership that'll be involved in the head coach search, interview, selection process is their HR department and their department of their DEI department. Which is standard across the league. So this will truly be Ryan Poles' hire, and it will decide his future.
No more excuses after this. So
you got your coach, you got your quarterback. If
right.
there's not an immediate turnaround, he's as good as gone.
So under that statement in consideration, I think that would be the perfect time to answer Andrew's question. What do you expect as far as your liking for head coach and also offensive coordinator, if you have one?
Offensive coordinator is tough, because your head coach that you bring in is going to, obviously have his choice and bring in his staff. So I don't know that I could pinpoint an offensive coordinator, because it's going to be different. It's going to look different for every head coach. Look, number one, top of the list, Ben Johnson. Period. Look, Ben Johnson is The Bears need, you talk about coaching archetypes, right? So you got your offensive minded head coach, you've got your defensive minded head coach, and then you've got, and this I think is so overblown, your leader of men archetype of head coach, which Vrabel would have fit into. That's bullshit anyway. That type of shit we saw in Tennessee wears on ownership anyway.
Yeah.
So good, go to New England. The Bears need an offensive minded head coach. And the biggest
Kraft loves that archetype right there. That's Bill Belichick Jr.
Sure. But at one point or another, Bill Belichick came from one of those two archetypes, offense or defense, right? And he developed into a leader. He became a leader. So to say that Ben Johnson or another defensive-minded head coaching candidate isn't going to be able to be a leader of men just doesn't make any sense. Everybody was at one point a first-time NFL head coach. And they either got it or they didn't. They could either lead or they couldn't. And that's going to have to be what it is with all of these guys that are first-time head coaches. But the most important reason why an offensive head coach is at the top of the list for the Bears is this. Caleb Williams is heading into year 2 of his rookie contract. Modern day NFL, where quarterbacks are paid $300-400 million, you have to maximize that rookie contract. In fact, you have to make a decision whether or not that's your guy by the end of year 3, when their 5th-year option comes about and they become extension eligible, because it's just too expensive of a process not to. And if you hire a defensive head coach, he may be a great leader of men. He may be able to put together a top 5 defense. The problem with hiring a defensive head coach, and why we've seen it go by the wayside so much in the NFL in recent years, is it is incredibly difficult to continuously identify, hire, and retain an elite offensive coordinator. When you have a defensive head coach, even if he nails the first hire in the offensive coordinator, and Mike Vrabel is a great example of this because he had Matt LaFleur as his first offensive coordinator in Tennessee. And we know how great Matt LaFleur is. Matt LaFleur left. Then what? Then you have Arthur Smith. So a downgrade. Good, but a downgrade. Arthur Smith leaves, takes the Atlanta job, and then you got shit offensive coordinators for the next 3 years, and it ends up leading to his demise and his firing. It is incredibly hard to hire and keep an offensive coordinator year after year after year when the NFL is constantly looking for the next best offensive mind to pluck from a team and hire as their head coach. So do you want to create an environment for Caleb Williams where you can pair him with Ben Johnson or another offensive mind like Joe Brady or Todd Monken or Drew Petzing or anything like that, and be able to say that we got our offensive coordinator, we got our offensive play caller paired with our quarterback for as long as we want to run this experiment out? Could be 3 years, could be 7 years, could be 15 years. And then figure out the defensive side of the ball. Or do you want to hire a defensive head coach or a leader of men guy and place the development of Caleb Williams into somebody who may or may not be qualified to do it? And if he is, he'll be gone in a year. And then you got to start over. You got to do the whole process again. You got to hope and pray you get the right guy a second consecutive time. And if you do, he's gone in a year.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point, actually. I didn't think about it that way, but that's an excellent point. Yeah, because this way you get the head coach, offensive mind. Offensive mind ain't going anywhere. You know, right. And defensive coordinators, you come and go all day long. I mean, 100%. Yeah. So, yeah, I didn't even think about that because, I was leaning, I was thinking Brian Flores. I really like his defense, but I know he did so terrible in Miami with I know they were tanking a little bit over there, but I know he did a bad job with Tua. I know that there was some rumblings about him and Tua not getting along or whatever. I don't really know what that's about too much, but
Flores is a wildly good defensive coordinator, but that's his ceiling in the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then a couple years ago when he left Miami, that was the same cycle as the Bears looking for their head coach that ended up being Matt Eberflus. I actually was convinced that Brian Flores would be a good candidate.
Yeah.
But 2 years later, I'm not. There's just too much that's come out. And, people say like, oh, Tua was soft. Tua was soft. Tua played at Alabama for Nick Saban.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ain't soft about Tua.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Brian Flores just doesn't, he's just not a head coach level communicator.
Yeah. So let me throw a name out there real quick. What do you think about
Eric? I just want to say that nobody can say Tua is soft because he went out there with a goddamn concussion. All right.
There's nothing soft about Tua.
No, he's definitely not soft. I mean,
a lot of people don't know this, but Tua Tagovailoa, when he was growing up and his father was training him, I mean, his father was worse than Brian Flores. Okay. He was like borderline abusive.
Yeah.
There ain't shit soft about Tua. Brian Flores just don't know how to, he's not capable of being the communicator that you need to be as a head coach. Wizard on defense, hate team in the NFC North. Hope he gets plucked off somewhere else just so we don't have to see him twice a year in the division.
Right.
Just not going to be, that's his ceiling for me.
So let me just throw a quick name out there, offensive wise, that I didn't hear the Bears. He's not on their radar, is Eric Bieniemy. Is that something that
Bieniemy falls into the same boat as Flores, where you have to ask yourself, this dude has Super Bowl rings. He worked under Andy Reid. Why hasn't he been hired as a head coach yet?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
And for a long time, people thought it was because the Matt Nagy thing didn't work out with him coming from Kansas City, from Andy Reid, and working under him and not being a play caller, right? Because Andy Reid calls plays and Andy Reid is on offense. Those guys consult on game planning. And so for a while, people thought, well, that's why he can't get hired, because, Matt Nagy ruined it for him, or because he don't call plays in Kansas City or whatever. Well, guess what? Ron Rivera gave him an opportunity to do so in Washington, and he sucked.
Yeah.
He's also got some shit in his background that the McCaskies would never like, and most ownership groups, obviously, results, speak for themselves. They don't want nothing to do with. He's very much a Brian Flores-like demeanor, personality with his players.
Yeah.
So another guy that, again, might be a great offensive mind, but he's just, if I had to bet right now, neither of those two guys ever get hired again as head coach in the NFL.
Gotcha.
What about one guy I did see getting talked about in the search was Kliff Kingsbury.
Kliff is like a consolation prize to me right now, for a couple of reasons. He did really well in Washington this year with Jaden Daniels, designing an offense that was easy for him to jump into and have success with. Cool. Kliff, he did the same thing for a little while in Arizona with Kyler Murray. But Kliff couldn't be the CEO on the sideline and the offensive guy. Like, he's a brilliant offensive mind, but he just couldn't be the CEO on the sideline. And he admitted that himself this recently after, working with Dan Quinn for a year. And so the thing with Kliff is, like, is he ready for another bite at the apple in terms of being able to do all those things? And personally, I don't see him being ready yet right now. After just one season with Dan Quinn, sure, he had a good look in the mirror and he realized some stuff. I'm just not comfortable. Like, this hire for the Bears is too important. To me, that seems like too much of a risk.
As you addressed it
for this hire.
Yet.
Also, the connection to Caleb Williams between those two is incredibly overblown by people on social media. Kliff Kingsbury spent 1 year at USC as an offensive assistant. And in the NCAA rules, offensive assistants, they're not allowed to directly coach the player. They're not the quarterback coach. They're not the offensive coordinator. So any work that they did together was, him like taking him under his arm, like, hey, I worked with Pat Mahomes before, and I worked at Texas Tech, and I worked with Kyler Murray in Arizona. So let me, show you a couple things type of thing. But it was only for 1 year. And that was Caleb Williams' second best year. Like, he was a Heisman Trophy winner the year before that, played better. USC played better. The 1 year that Kingsbury, got his PR hire at USC, right? That was his damage control year, where he was going to use that to get himself back into consideration for jobs. It's bullshit. There's no strong Caleb Williams tie there that would necessitate, him being a head coach candidate. Hey, and if Caleb Williams loved him so much, he would have been the offensive coordinator of the Bears.
What about offensive coordinator? But speaking of offensive coordinators, last season you were high on hiring Bobby Slowick, and recently there's been some scrutiny on his progression. They feel like he's backsliding. What do you think about that?
I think any less of Bobby Slowick this year than I did last year, and I don't think there's any evidence that would support that. Is he my number one candidate this year? No, just because I don't think he's going to leave Houston. I just don't think he's in consideration, period. I think he's staying in Houston. And the hiring cycle, it's like that, man. But there's times where a guy is a hot guy and then he's not hot the next. And a lot of the shit that we see, 99% of the shit that we see about these names is put out there into the open space by the agents, by ownership. So these are manufactured narratives that we're dealing with. So he ain't the guy this year. He's not out there. That's fine. So that's why I haven't really given it much consideration, because if we gotta let's do homework and explore like realistic targets and candidates. And so when I said earlier that Ben Johnson is at the top of my list, it's important to understand that it's not boom or bust with Ben Johnson for me. It's not like if they don't hire Ben Johnson, it's not going to be a good hire. I just think that Ben Johnson has the most upside of anybody. So he's at the top of the list.
Gotcha.
So I am seeing a lot of where a lot of people are still interviewing Bobby Slowick, and Drew said the same thing. He's not sure he would leave. Now Drew, he stated that he didn't think so because the Texans are in a good position.
Sure.
But my point being,
Ben Johnson did the same shit the last 2 years. He turned down the Washington job last year. He turned down a job before that because he just was comfortable where he was at. And he was in a good spot.
Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, money talk, bullshit walk, right? And
Sure.
Eberflus made over 3 times as much as as Slowick. So I feel like if you offer him the same contract, he would probably jump.
That's a sound rationale, knowing human nature, right? We've all been in that position before, but honest to God, man, some guys really just don't care, or they know that, hey, I don't have to jump at it now because it's going to be there for me next year.
Yeah.
Don't think that Bobby Slowick's not going to be in next year's cycle in the thick.
Yeah.
That's
what are we hearing about? What do we think about Pete Carroll?
Well,
I'll do this. I'm going to give
before you get to Pete Carroll, because I got a statement on that. Okay,
I'm going to give you guys my top 5 right now on my list right now. Okay?
There you go.
So when Jack was saying earlier, I said I had better things to do. That was me pounding out my head coach power rankings for tomorrow at Bleacher Nation. I'll give you my top 5.
Before you do that, I got one last question about Bobby Slowick.
Go ahead.
Do you think he's good enough to where if we let him hit the next coaching cycle and we passed on him, would it be like, is it worth letting that happen?
I don't think the Bears have a choice at this point. You know what I mean? They don't have a choice. I don't think he wants to leave right now. I think he's in the Ben Johnson boat where he sees this cycle is very heavy, right? So this isn't the ideal cycle for him to be the top of the pack. This is Ben Johnson's cycle. This is 2 years in the making that this is Ben Johnson's cycle. Yeah. This stuff, it flows. This is 2 years in the making that this has been Johnson's cycle. So this is not going to be the most lucrative time, whether it be financially or in terms of the position that he lands, being ready for success quickly. This is not the time for him. So maybe next year he gets hired by somebody and he does great. And if things are awesome, the Bears hire Ben Johnson or somebody of the like, and things are going great in Chicago, nobody gives a shit about what Bobby Slowick's doing in Miami, or Vegas or whoever he lands with next year. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody thinks about it. Now, if shit goes south with this head coaching hire, then everybody's playing the hindsight game. But I think it's unfair to play that because right now I just don't think that Slowick is a legitimate option on his end for anybody this year.
And also, I think you can get away with just saying,
hire somebody that don't want a job.
It's on Ryan Poles anyway at that point. They're going to be dogging Ryan Poles anyway.
Yeah, he's gone anyway. It's a complete reset. Everything's blown up, or we're set back another 5 years. It's fucked. If they don't get this coaching right, if they don't get this right, this whole situation is fucked.
I would like to answer
on up.
Oh, there you go. You went out on my end. But I would like to answer Kelly's question first, just because I feel like you're going to throw some names out there that we're going to want to dive into.
Yeah.
With this whole Pete Carroll thing, I got two things to say. First of all, I need a coach under 70. Second of all, we're talking about the coach that made the worst call in NFL history. So no, thank you.
Have you seen Matt Eberflus this season? one call is more famous than the other, but that's not to say that Matt Eberflus hasn't made 7 worse calls this year than Pete Carroll ever did. And not to mention, look, he was on the 1 yard line in the Super Bowl after winning the Super Bowl the previous year.
Right. Right.
So
okay,
you
listen.
gotta be there. You got to have a seat at the table.
Listen, I'm good with going from a F- to a D+. Okay.
That's not the case, though. Here, I'm going to quickly give you the top 5, and then I'm going to hit Carroll because I know everybody wants to talk about Carroll because his age and everything is a little bit polarizing for the conversation. So Ben Johnson's number 1. Todd Monken, the Ravens offensive coordinator, is number 2.
Okay.
You better not touch my fucking offensive.
Everybody's high on what Monken has done for Jackson the last 2 years, and it's obviously a massive feather in his cap. But let's not forget that he put Stetson Bennett up at Georgia as a Heisman runner-up, and Stetson Bennett's never taken a snap in the NFL. He's absolute ass. So he worked his magic there. And then when he was with Cleveland and Tampa Bay, nobody paid attention to him because Cleveland and Tampa Bay sucked as a team, but he was instrumental in Mike Evans' development. He was instrumental in creating balanced run and pass attacks in both of those dog shit situations. He got the most out of Ryan Fitzpatrick. He got the most out of Jameis Winston. He got the most out of Baker Mayfield in this rookie year. So Monken's experience with developing quarterbacks and playmakers on offense goes far beyond what he's done with Lamar in Baltimore, and he's widely considered a great leader and a voice. The only drawback is, and this is what might cost him job in Chicago because the McCaskies are absolutely ridiculous. Let's get a little dark, so I'll turn the light on. Is he's got a mouth of a trucker. He's straight up blunt, like and the McCaskies just don't. They didn't even let people. They barred swearing on Hard Knocks. They got to have everything clean and whatever. So Monken might take a hit there, although he is from the Chicagoland area too, so he could win back some brownie points there. After Monken, I got Joe Brady. Last year, the Bills were dead in the water until they fired Ken Dorsey, and elevated Joe Brady. Since Joe Brady took over, he spun their season around, their offense around last year, cut Stephon Diggs' targets to the point where he was expendable this offseason, increased James Cook, increased the balance in the offense, and got them into the playoffs last year when they were dead in the water. And then this year they won the AFC East by like November because, again, he has Josh Allen playing the most efficient football in his career. Joe Brady was also at LSU with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. He also had turned in Teddy Bridgewater's best season when he was with Carolina Panthers as their offensive coordinator. So plenty of good stuff there. Then comes Pete Carroll at number 4. And to me, Carroll's like if we get this far down the list, I'm cool with it under one condition. And this is a major caveat. And like in these profiles that I've done on all these head coaches at work, at the end of it, I have a section, one big question, where I ask one question that has to be at the top of the Bears list to each of these candidates, and they have to answer it right to be the right guy, right? So the one big question for Carroll has to be, given he's 74 years old, what is the succession plan, right? Because there's no doubt about it that if the Bears want to maximize on Caleb Williams right now in the window of his rookie contract and the talent that they currently have on their roster, Pete Carroll succeeded at every level. He won a national championship with USC. He won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks. He developed Russell Wilson into a potential future Hall of Famer. He was the architect of the Legion of Boom defense, one of the greatest defenses in NFL history. He's widely regarded as one of the best communicators, one of the best culture builders, one of the best players, coaches ever in any sport. So he can come in and hit all the boxes you need right now in the next 2 to 3 years. The question then becomes, what happens when he's 77, 78 years old? Do we start this process from scratch? No, nobody's interested in that. So he has to have a firm succession plan in place on day one if he's the right guy for this job.
No doubt.
Could always put him for a 1 season and hire Bobby Slowick.
No, but that's the whole. They'll start over a whole new system, whole new people, whole new this. Like he's got to groom somebody.
The only way that works is if you get him a badass offensive coordinator, and then that's the plan. Is like he hands it off to him.
Exactly. What about if we hire Pete and Pete brings in Kliff as OC?
There's a lot of what ifs there. I don't hate it. I don't hate it because I do think that Kliff is a guy that, like I said earlier, I don't think he's ready for another bite of the apple just yet. So that's something that I wouldn't hate. You could talk me into that.
Yeah. I mean, I think Carroll, if anything, I'll give it to him that he does have said experience to be able to possibly get Kliff to that point. So
I agree. Yeah, you can talk me into that. There's nothing I can legitimately pick apart at that, right? And I think the whole thing is, and this is what the Bears should be doing. So when I do these evaluations and I spend hours and hours on all these coaches and put together 1,500 words on their background and all this shit. I'm looking for a reason to say no. You know what I mean? One reason. If I can't find a reason to say no, then I'm confident with you being in the, that top tier of potential guys that are going to work out. And I can't find a reason to say no with that strategy. Other than, again, if he doesn't have that succession plan in place, then it's a no for me, because I'm not interested in doing this again in 2 to 3 years. I don't think it goes back to the same thing where I said, don't hire a defensive coach because you want stability on the offensive side of the ball with your franchise quarterback for 5-10 years. You don't want to have to keep doing this shit over and over again and hope you get it right. The Bears don't have a history of getting this shit right. If they get it right one time, I don't want to see them try it again in 2 years.
Right.
I don't like our chances at that point. If we pull a clover out of our ass this time around, I'm not trying to do this again. Not trying to test that luck again in 2 years with the same ownership group.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt.
Who's your fifth?
Drew Petzing, the Cardinals offensive coordinator. I think of all those candidates, he's done the most with the least. So he'd be number 5.
Yeah, see, I like how you segue to all that because, we talked about the Ravens, we talked about Buffalo, we talked about Arizona, and those 3 guys are on your list. So
he was setting
how that worked out
up every time he was talking about something. He was name dropping them too. He like oh, you remember this name I said earlier?
Hey, yeah, man.
What would you think of Mike Tomlin?
If the Steelers are stupid enough to fire Mike Tomlin, teams will line up to hire him tomorrow.
What about trading for him? I heard a lot of trading picks for Mike Shanahan or Tomlin, and you think that'll ever happen? I don't see that happening, but I mean, I've heard some of that stuff.
The Bears aren't in position to do that. They need all the draft capital they can get because they legitimately need 3 new offensive line starters. Like they legitimately need 2 starting guards and a starting center next year. They are not in the position to do that.
Never trade a pick for a fucking coach.
So,
fuck you.
No, I mean, all those guys are great. But I said it last night. I tweeted it last night. As soon as the Steelers lost, and look, Baltimore's so much fucking better than them. They were gonna lose that game. I don't know what Steelers fans expected. Like,
right?
Be realistic. You were not gonna beat the Ravens.
Right.
Oh, but I'll tell you one example. of a team though that was successful trading was back in the day. The Bucks. Yeah, Gruden. Yeah, they traded Raiders. Straight to the Super Bowl. So I'm just saying,
the Broncos in that situation. Denver just traded for Sean Payton 2 years ago, so it worked. It worked out again.
Oh, that's right.
But I'm saying, like, trading picks for a coach with a team that needs their picks so dire and has such a deep OC/head coach pool to pluck from would be stupid at this point.
I think that's kind of where I'm at. Like Kelly, absolutely. Like it's worked out for other teams. I would love to see Shanahan or Tomlin or somebody like that.
Right.
But like, there's so many good coaches available in this cycle that
you're right. Yeah,
you're leveraging a lot.
You don't need a trade to get a good coach. Yeah.
Cycle was if the coaching cycle was shit, then I'd be beating the table for it because we already established how important this hire is, but it's just not there. And like Steelers fans, they're like, oh, fire Tomlin. He hasn't won a playoff game in 8 years and this and that. Motherfucker, you're in the playoffs.
They're crazy.
Every year. Like,
you're in the playoffs every year. Your team is shit. Shut up.
He gets the most out of everything on that roster every single year. Like teams would line up to hire him. They back Brinks trucks up to his house. It ain't even funny. And you know what? Honest to God, it could be a case of maybe it's time for him to just go somewhere else. It could be like the Andy Reid scenario where he was in Philadelphia for so long and he had so much success. And everybody sat there and said the same thing we said, that everybody would back up Brinks trucks to hire him. And they parted ways. It was time for new for them. And Andy Reid went to Kansas City and did what he did.
I have heard a lot of talk about the Pittsburgh organization and Tomlin coming to a mutual time for a fresh start.
Let's say they fire Mike Tomlin. Where would he be on your list?
Good question.
Because for me, I my top 2 was Ben Johnson and then Mike Tomlin. Just because Mike Tomlin brings every team to the playoffs.
I think Tomlin would be 3 for me right now.
Okay.
And that's kind of why I don't think it's worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze on trading for him, because he's not my number 1 or 2 right now. He's 3 for sure. I would love the hire. I just don't think it's a hire you should make where you have to give up draft capital for it, because I have him like firmly behind Johnson and Monken at this point. He would be ahead of Joe Brady. He would be ahead of Pete Carroll. He would kind of be like a younger, similar scenario.
Pete Carroll.
But yeah, I think he'd be 3 right now.
I don't know if this tells the future or what, but I was on Facebook the other day and there was like one of those things.
Oh my, that never tells the future. By the way.
No, it's like one of those like videos. It's like, oh, a screenshot to see the Bears' next head coach, and it's like flipping between their heads.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it was I don't know his name, but the guy from Arizona,
Drew
their offensive coordinator.
Yeah. Look, Petzing's a sneaky dark horse candidate, right? Because everyone's so enamored with Ben Johnson, and then you got Todd Monken and Joe Brady both in the playoffs. Baltimore and Buffalo in the last 48 hours, their offenses fucking shredded their opponents, just further strengthening their candidacies. And then you got Pete Carroll and everything he brings to the table. So like, there you go. You got 4 strong candidates right there that everybody's enamored with one direction or another. And Petzing, he's out in Arizona doing like really good under the radar work. Kelly, I was like, Arizona's has by far the number 1 rushing attack in the West this year. And you're like, fuck, I didn't know that. And like a lot of people are in that boat. So, but inside the football circles, like people do know who Petzing is. So like, he's a sneaky dark horse candidate because he's just not getting he doesn't have the same name attraction or sex appeal.
He's not getting the press for it. Yeah.
Right. As the other coaching candidates do, but that doesn't mean that he's not as good as any of them.
Right. Yeah, no, that's you know what? I always learn something new.
If he ends up being the hire.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Now when you're laying out all the facts, I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, if I wouldn't have heard all that and I would have heard him get the head coach, I'd have been like, fucking Bears, man. What the fuck?
Yeah. Completely understandable. When I got my whiteboard next to my desk. When I initially hammered out the 47 names they want to interview, like a power ranking style, Petzing was like 10.
Yeah.
And when I, did put in a week of research and homework on him in particular, he shot up to 5, right? So
yeah, he's in your top 5. Yeah,
that's what some incredible candidates in front of him. So
right.
He's a guy would be met with a very lukewarm, skeptical reception by most, and it's almost solely because of where he's at. He just flies under the radar. Similar to Todd Monken before now in Baltimore, before he's getting the press he is with the Ravens because of Lamar Jackson and what they're doing. When he was doing great things in Tampa and Cleveland, nobody was talking about him to be a head coach candidate.
You know what? That's another one I like. You said he's from the Chicagoland area and he's got a foul mouth. I think that's
he's us.
I think he's probably the one guy. That's another one that you mentioned that I didn't even think of, and I think he's perfect.
So for me, I think that he is a number 1 candidate for me. The hard time I have with it is I'm also a Ravens fan.
Too fucking bad.
So it's hard for me to be like, take him away. Now, a dream scenario would be if the Ravens win the Super Bowl this year and then the Bears take them and win the Super Bowl next year. I'd be great with that. But, we could all wish but regardless, I think that we should move on to a new topic because the head coach isn't the only issue with the Bears, right?
Hey, Jack, before we move on real quick, I got to go.
Take it easy, brother.
All right, bro.
All right, Drewski.
Yeah, he's got to take care of that egging on his car.
Later, Drew.
All right, peace. So, let me change the. All right, there we go. And actually, I could put this back on because I don't plan on putting any more graphics back up. There we go. All right. So, next topic.